Hi everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Rise of Privacy Tech webcast series. I'm Lourdes Turrecha, the founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech, which, as you know, brings together founders, investors, advisors, and advocates of privacy innovation. Our mission is to fuel privacy innovation, and we do this by bringing together the key players in the space. So again, the investors, the founders, and the advisors. And with that, we want to bridge the tech capital and expertise gaps in order to fuel privacy innovation. In my previous lives, I've largely been an operator, specifically a privacy and cybersecurity lawyer, strategist, and program leader. I am now focused on consulting and advising privacy tech startups. And I'm really excited to bring with me today our guests who are also advisors and founders and consultants in this space. Finneran-Dennedy is the co-founder of Comply With Me and former CEO of Drumwave and one of the first chief privacy officers in the world. Melanie Ensign is the CEO of Discernible Incorporated, which is a privacy communications firm for privacy teams. Melanie was the head of security and privacy communications at Uber, and she is also the press lead for DEF CON, the world's biggest hacking conference. Ladies, welcome to the Rise of Privacy Tech webcast series, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. I'd like to kick us off with a journey through history and ask, how did each one of you end up in this nascent privacy tech space? Melanie?
Sure. So I actually come to privacy with a security background. So I've spent most of my career advising cybersecurity organizations around specific communication and organizational strategy needs. When I joined Uber, it was actually my first day at Uber. I had accepted the role of leading security communications, and on day one, they said, oh, and also privacy. So, for most of my career, privacy really lived within the realm of legal. And so I worked really closely with privacy counsel throughout my entire career. But now that privacy I think people are really understanding that there is far more technical discipline involved in this than just, having some policies and some regulations. And so more and more over time, privacy became a bigger part of my remit, working with security teams as well as engineering teams. So whether it's an infrastructure team, networking team, site reliability team, the folks who, the service owners of your data warehouses, these are all the folks that I had to work with in my previous roles in order to create a honest, authentic, and cohesive communication strategy for privacy.
Thanks for that, Mel. Mickey, I know you have an amazing history, and we've talked about that quite a few times. So I would love for you to share some, the highlights of that really brilliant history that you have in this space and share that with some of our attendees and then later our viewers.
And thank you for not making me go after Michelle.
Well, I wanted to hear, I hadn't heard the full Melanie story. We've discussed it one-on-one, so I'm very pleased because it's actually a good bookend. And my journey was not dissimilar in that I came from a different discipline. When I went to law school, back when there were like wagon wheels and things, there wasn't even a class in privacy. And so, in fact, the great Joel, who just passed away this year, sadly, from cancer, he was just talking to us when I was a third-year student about having a cyber law practice at all. And David Bender had written the compendium on tech licensing. And so this is how nascent this field is. I'm old, but not that old. So when I came to it, I was a patent litigator, and I showed up on my first day at Sun Microsystems, home of the CEO that says, you have absolutely zero privacy, get over it. And much to the Mel of his era's chagrin, he did it at a press conference, and in reference to technology that actually allowed you to, this is gonna be hard for privacy people, it's big. It allowed you to print wirelessly. And that was going to be like the biggest privacy catastrophe of the late 90s, is that you might be able to like go into a office and print something on their printer. once you were inside the firewall. So
that sounds like a basic capability that I've never actually seen come to fruition. I wish that was possible in my own office.
If I could get my stuff to print in my own home office, this pandemic would be much better, and I'd probably have, actual coffee in the mug. So I came at it from, and it's relevant to go that far back into my past, because in training to be a patent litigator, you are not just looking at intellectual property, but you're looking at how are rights and boundaries drawn in the ephemeral world. What is the beginning of a new, non-obvious reduction to a practice for an invention that we're willing to give certain rights to in various jurisdictions? There's conflict of law all over the place. And then you have to look at what has come before. What are the situational intelligence around patent? And so when I showed up at Sun, what they really needed was a trademark lawyer. And the great Ruby Zeffo, who's now a privacy person, we have successfully converted her. She was actually the head of trademarks and brands from an operational perspective in the legal department. And while I was learning the ropes in trademarks under Rudy's tutelage, a file came in to support the CMO that was privacy. And the new kid in town got it because no one else wanted it. And I think that's a journey for a lot of the early privacy players. And quite frankly, why you see so many women and people of color in the field is that when we started doing privacy 20 years ago and plus, it was kind of the stinky diaper of the profession. It was not looked at as prestigious as patent litigation or corporate law or mergers and acquisition, but you came to it with this sense of, when I looked at the portfolio of what my company actually did, and I listened to the rhetoric of my C-suite, there was such a disconnect of how can you sell encryption and advocate for compute everywhere and thin client technology, which I still to this day, give me a Sunray all day long. And then have this position that privacy is just too dang hard for us to do. So Sun was a long, informative 10 years of my life. And I left the law, which was hard, to run a business function for privacy, to advocate for our customers, to advocate for the development process, and to really look into things like when James Gosling was working on the community editions of Java, we were talking about things like garbage collection. Now, garbage collection is unwanted bits and material and information. To a privacy geek, this is also a vulnerability that leads to intelligible information about people. So understanding how the product is made, even for a law geek who's not an engineer, became paramount. And as I progressed through, I was bought by Oracle, and I did 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days in sales. Who's counting? Making a ton of money, but not a lot of impact in my chosen field. So I went from there. There was an M&A transaction where Intel bought McAfee, reunited Ruby and myself again. She was doing intellectual property for Intel at that point. I came in as Vice President, Chief Privacy Officer on the security side for McAfee. And we put together their process there and really started working across the field, people like Jason and Ian Oliver and folks across the industry that were barreling down this path of what we dubbed privacy engineering. So privacy by design, of course, being the public policy goals and objectives, but not broken down into what I called old-fashioned engineering, looking at the entire system, people, process, and available technology, and looking at it in terms of what could we build if we wanted to build it today with the materials that we actually have. And that's an ACOF principle from way back in management land. So I built their practice there. We collaborated with Jonathan Fox and my father, Tom Finneran, to write the Privacy Engineers Manifesto, and then wash and repeat at Cisco. So that brings us almost up to date. I left just in time for a pandemic to be the CEO of an analytics company. And I'm still on their board as a board of advisor for Drumwave, but I also realized that we are, and it's appropriate to the rise of privacy technology. There I was selling visualization software when my true calling is really human rights meets commercial rights, meets metrics and professionalism in this strange little niche world called privacy. So that's what I'm doing now, is advising customers, kicking off our own software that we call Comply With Me. We're still in stealth mode, but I assure you it's got nothing to do with any of my other clients that are doing app mapping and dealing with big data sets and clipping and making analytics safer to use, etc. There's a world of innovation that is just dawning now. So that was a really long introduction, but now we're up to date.
Thank you for that. I'm with you 100% on the privacy innovation field, offering just a host of market opportunities, even at its nascency, to those people who are able to recognize that privacy offers value, and it's not just a compliance hurdle that most privacy practitioners might treat it to be. Like I said, it's still at its nascency, but its future is brimming with possibilities. I see a world where technology is designed with privacy in mind, and maybe that makes me green and super hopeful. But I'd like to be hopeful in this case.
What draws your old trees, Lourdes? Trees are green and hopeful.
These are the reasons that I'm drawn to this nascent privacy tech space. What makes you excited about it? What made you say, I'm going to co-found Comply With Me and do my own thing in this really exciting space?
Probably lack of competent psychotherapy. But other than that, I really, I love helping companies and spending time building their programs and teams. And I've been very, very blessed with some amazing people with whom to work. So I do love that team setting, but I also, I recognize, particularly having spent the last 18 months with venture capitalists, that what they're investing in is trying to be a wash and repeat of what we did in security. So it's like tool, 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 look at the breach tool, 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 look at the breach tool. And so I really wanted to give it an air of what did I not have? What did I have to build by myself? So you look at OneTrust. They're doing what we all did as old-fashioned privacy officers, is you would develop a PIA and then you'd walk around the company and you'd build yourself a nice spreadsheet. And you'd have people sharing that information. Well,
you definitely did not have people sharing that information.
Well, unfortunately, of course they were, and of course they didn't use their BCC.
It was shared amongst each other.
I wish it was so. The times that a privacy report was sent to a huge listserv without the BCC is just one of the many scars. But that's where I think I'm at right now, is I want us who have had some track record in a non-academic sense, because I revere the academics, but until you've faced off with a grumpy CISO who will tell you that privacy doesn't exist and then wink at you and say, but I know that's your job, that person has to be handled appropriately if you're going to partner with them to have the appropriate contextual protection for data information that goes everywhere. If they try to pick out, I've had this on CISO to CISO conversations, you pick out PII and go, okay, our practice now is like taking out this red M&M from the bag, and then we can just munch on all the other M&Ms and eat no other food. And the minute that a privacy practitioner recognizes that the exercise is not excising and making secret personal data or personally identifiable data, but the exercise is really one in authorized sharing, contextual management, and ethics. And once you figure out what those requirements are, you can go into the technology stack and figure out, where does the human need to be? Comply With Me is about a human on both ends of the transaction. It's not an automation tool. And where does the technology speak best? We have structure to databases that can tell you what type of information is in them. The way we practice privacy in many cases is a person talks to another person talk. And we all know what happens with the game of telephone. So where we have data and where we have technology today that can be leveraged, I think that's where I'm really looking at this marketplace as a place of absolutely untapped growth and an exercise in value add for governments, nonprofits, and for-profit business.
I want to jump to Melanie, but just a couple of points on what you said that I want to highlight. It seems to be a thing with CISOs. My first job building privacy within a CISO's organization about a decade ago, I got the same exact statement. Privacy is dead. Like, why did you hire me? Why am I here if privacy is dead? Why is this job even here? And so your point about, yeah, we can learn from the cybersecurity industry, but we also need to recognize that privacy and security aren't the same things. And yes, there's an intersection, there's an overlap, but there is this whole other side of the privacy domain that has nothing to do with security, that has everything to do with use and transparency and purpose of processing. Mel, go ahead.
I would suggest that there are things that we can learn from what we went through on the security side rather than trying to repeat it. For example, many of us learned the hard way just how incredibly difficult it is to convince people of the importance of what you're doing if they see you as only compliance, if they see you as a cost center, if the only message you have to offer is one of FUD or fear mongering. So there are a lot of things that we learned along the way on the security side, particularly in regards to how we communicate with other partners, other departments, other organizations, our customers, our regulators. And so there are definitely things that we can take away from security in terms of lessons learned. But truth be told, there are only a handful of those things that are actually technology. It's more operational, business, acumen and things like that. And so it's very interesting to me when I see security vendors just all of a sudden switch their marketing as if their security product is also a privacy product, because it's very often not the case. If it's true, then it was probably never really a very good security product to begin with. And so the fact that there are so many people in privacy that have security experience, whether it be the practitioners or the advisors or the investors, I think that is wonderful, so long as we don't lose sight of what's actually of value from that experience, versus trying to clone it and put a privacy sticker on it.
Or even looking at the addressable marketplace as security. I think there's a lot of zero-sum investors saying that if this one penny is not going to go to security, maybe I'll put it in a privacy tool. And I think that's incorrect. I think your addressable market can be including marketers that are not doing in-person trainings right now and need to manage data better to have access to the type of audiences they want to reach, for example. So if you look at the addressable market as simply IT, and there's nothing simple about today's IT, or simply security and privacy in a bucket, or even compliance and risk tech, you're really looking, I think, in the wrong place for the right kind of market as you're developing your technology and figuring out what is my total addressable market. And most importantly, and this is where I'm like shaking the trees desperately right now, we have to get to yes, which is a lesson learned from the security tribe. You can't be the doctor, no, you can't do it, or no, you can't do it, or when it's encrypted, it's done. But at the same time, you're not there to be a yes man. And in many cases, you go into a job, whether you're a consultant or a full-time employee, as a privacy professional, and you are there as a change agent. And it is hard as hell. And people will fight you. And if you're doing your job right, and I tell everyone before they hire me this, sometimes they forget, people will be mad about me. People will be upset in meetings about me because I'm looking horizontally and I'm looking way beyond 3 months to figure out, is this asset a wasting asset or is this asset a bomb that's gonna go off? And that's why you hire competent privacy professionals in the business and partner them with competent legal partners and understand that that's not the same, security is not the same. So selling into this market is really tricky because there's not one buyer yet.
Yeah, and I think I'll just say one thing, and then I actually have a question for you, Lourdes, after this comment. Is that something that I notice a lot with privacy startups and the VCs that invest in them is that they truly believe that compliance is the greatest pain point for privacy practitioners. They miss the fact that the hardest part of this job and the thing that we really, really want help with is what you just described, is the fact that you are often the change agent and you need something to offer these other teams and organizations that you are trying to influence and negotiate with. And if your solution literally only solves like a workflow challenge and doesn't help me increase influence, doesn't help me make friends with the business, like you really haven't solved my problem. And therefore I have zero loyalty to your product.
Thank you for preempting my question. I was just about to ask you, Mel, and Mickey, what could the founders, some of whom are listening right now, the B2B privacy tech founders could learn from this point, right? Because they're from the outside. How could they help the privacy professionals make the case for their products, especially if they're not, their products are going beyond compliance, even if their products are creating business value for the company as a privacy tech product. And so Melanie, that was perfect. You just pretty much free.
I do what I can.
This is why we love her.
That's fine.
Applications. I mean, it's not a mistake that Mel is on the first episode for the rise of privacy technology. We have a communications mountain to climb with investors, with purchasers, with implementation folks, figuring out if we are lucky enough to buy a tool to serve us, do we have the engineers that will maintain that tool? Do we have enough time, or are we getting somebody's leftover like cycles on the weekend to maybe tape together something in secret? And all of that has to be taken into consideration. And maybe that means that you look at the privacy officer as an influencer and not necessarily your primary market leader. It might be someone in data quality if you're lucky enough to have a CDO. It could be someone in straight up tech who's looking at a bucket of analytics and they're thinking they might want to sell it or share it or just figure out how to make it not a swamp. So this is the kind of detailed thinking why everyone, first of all, should hire all three of us together. But the question I'm always going to ask you is, what's the problem that you're solving with your technology?
Yeah, and to that point, it's not, the privacy practitioner is not always the person whose problem needs to be solved, right? It could be the data scientist, it could be the data warehouse owners, it could be, quite honestly, it could be your customer support team that is just so tired of dealing with all of these manual tickets, right? So, if you're going to use the privacy team or leader as a conduit from a sales perspective, they need things that they can take to those other departments to talk about performance, latency. I have to say one of the biggest challenges that we have with the legacy solutions right now that are already in market is they require so much customization that when the legal teams buy them and force implementation on the technical teams, there is now so much resentment built up between the engineers and the lawyers that relationship is worse than it was before, because the lawyers are like, great, we get this new automated spreadsheet. And the engineers are like, you have pulled resources off of our critical projects to customize a solution that we didn't want in the first place. So, I agree with Michelle. If you can actually go to those departments directly and recognize that your buyer may not have privacy in their title. But if you're going to go through a privacy department, understand who their customers are, and they have to sell this into their customers, and their customers are not lawyers.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to pick up on this thread because it's so important, because I think I love the tools that are in the market. So if you're from any of those companies, I'm not bashing you at all. But they have caused a lot of ill will. And the sort of need that they were addressing was, I need to report that I'm quote unquote compliant, which is a joke. You're never compliant. It's It's like eating, like I have been fed. That's great. What are you having tomorrow?
You're gonna have to do tomorrow. Yeah, exactly.
You got to do it again. But so now if you're actually in this space, and a lot of the companies that we've all been talking to in the last couple of months, one of the pain points has become, how do we feed this beast of a tool that we have that's very, very manual? So if you've got a tool that helps me to truly document that I have anonymized a large data set, that actually enhances the investment that's already gone down, where you've got a verbal talky-talk form filled out in the reporting tool. So now if you can feed in and show me that it interoperates with the existing tool in the market, I'm a happy camper, and I don't have to own the whole Megillah. So I can tell my partner over in analytics, and the one that owns the customer data lake, the one that owns the feature data lake, the ones in security that have the bug reports and penetration testing data, that you can compartmentalize the use of this tool. And maybe it's 3 different licenses, and good for you, entrepreneur, you get 3 customers in one. But to understand and really get into the business of how this thing lives in the marketplace is so exciting to me. I think that's where the best tools are going to really show up and grow. Right now, you're running in a greenfield, and it's great, but this greenfield is going to look like security in less than 10 years. We're going to walk into the rise of technology, the rise of privacy technology conference, and you're going to see the Moscone Center full of 50,000 vendors.
I'm positive that if we work on an event together, it will not look like RSA.
Fair point. Fair point. No, but hats off to Art Cavella. He made security something people invest in, even to go hang out and have beers every year. I mean, that's the magic of RSA for me. I haven't been to a session unless I'm speaking on it.
I mean, just look at the lineup we had in June, right? I am obviously biased as the founder and the person who put it together, but we like to walk our talk. But I digress. Speaking of privacy solutions and the problems that they're trying to solve, what are some of the biggest privacy problems that you see out there? And do you think they're solvable through technology?
So I'll start, and then I'll pass it on to Mel, who has probably more a comprehensive view.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean, I'm going to set it up just quickly. Some folks would say it's privacy regulation. Others would say that it's the privacy debt that we have in technology. Is it somewhere in between? Mickey, we've talked about this. Go ahead.
I think my number one sort of itchy thing is really bad data. I think we have access to some data, most of it is poor, well-intentioned. You know, I don't think anyone fills out a form and tries to lie. Sometimes they do, like, oh, I'm in marketing and I have 0 PII. They're saying that to get out of filling their PII out. And it's its own red flag. If you have no PII and you're in HR and marketing, then it just means you're going to get a personal visit from me, because obviously you need some training. But I think the reality is, and I think we are also victim to this. And certainly I built this great audit tool at Drumwave last year that allows you to load all of your data onto a platform and then use these beautiful visualizations and graphics to look at it and interrogate that. Well, what I found is nobody really was ready to do that. It's too big of a lift. So there are companies that want to do that in the analytics section, sectionalize that progress, so that you're not saying we're going to load everything in the corporation today, because you don't have the infrastructure or the people, the soft part of your systems prepared to actually even have or manage that thing. I look at a layer 9, for example, again, biased, I advise them, they map the app. I was gobsmacked when I saw what they were working on. They map the most important apps and the most popular apps, and they actually look at they listen to the metadata. I love that. Solve me a problem that I know I have. Right now with Schrems and the other stuff, I keep saying they should name the next privacy shield Schrems. So Schrems 3 will be Schrems versus Schrems. But apart from my own personal amusement, balkanization of data is occurring now. How are we dealing with procurement, How are we dealing with trans-border transparencies? How are we monitoring that terms and conditions that are fought for in legal documentation have any relevance in real data? So think about your data profile getting more and more nutritious, and you're going to start to have a higher visibility into strategic moves you can make instead of trying to catch up on stuff.
I want to pull in a comment our friend Jason made about how companies aren't mature enough for many of these tools. And maybe Melanie, take it, because I see your response there. I'd love for you to share it.
So it's interesting because this is actually ties into what I was going to say in response to what I think is the biggest privacy challenge right now, is that people think that they have to have privacy in their title for this to be their responsibility. When quite honestly, the biggest, and I'm going to call them offenders, but they just don't know any better. They're not intentionally doing bad things, but the biggest offenders of privacy violations inside companies are people who have never thought that privacy applied to them or their role, right? So one of the things that used to keep me awake as an in-house communications lead was shadow IT. And the fact that the marketing department and, you know, all of these other teams were just signing on vendors. I mean, the average marketing team has over like 200 vendors, and they just like sign them up all the time and tell nobody. And then, you know, I get a call from the Washington Post wondering why we're sharing user data with some company that I've never heard of, right? And I have to go track down who signed this contract and what are we actually sharing, and you know, do we actually need them? And was this contract approved? You know, do you just like sign up on, you know, like Typeform one day and like told nobody? So, you know, that to me is the biggest challenge, that, you know, and again, it's a takeaway from security is like our greatest vulnerability is the unknown unknowns, right? And I just worry so much about what other departments and organizations at a company are doing that could have a very profound impact, not just on compliance, but on actual privacy for your customers and your users, because the people making those decisions that are going to impact privacy we haven't taught them that this is part of their job too. And so we have a very small contingency of privacy professionals swimming against the tide of lots of data scientists, lots of marketers, lots of, you know, finance and HR folks, all well-intentioned, but going in the opposite direction. If you look at the industry trends in each of these professions, none of them besides privacy are getting closer to privacy. And so, you know, that to me is the greatest challenge we have right now, is that we are trying to, you know, cure a very, very big disease with a small handful of, you know, professionals.
And this goes to our discussion, Mickey, of privacy as a wicked problem, right? I mean, you can't, and, you know, and the idea, I mean, do you mind walking us through what that means?
Yeah, not at all. So we, my partner, Brian Lee, who is the head of education for Drumwave, we were talking about how do we approach the business people without privacy in the title, and how do we figure out, and how have we figured out in the past with other really pernicious and ongoing problems. And one particular conversation we were having, we were commenting on this one podcast or whatever it was, that they kept saying, well, privacy is a journey. Privacy is a journey. I'm like, no.
Was it a marketing podcast?
Of course.
Yeah, okay. I was like, that sounds like marketing speak.
Yeah.
They're always on a journey.
Well, and we hear this also like in practitioners speak when we're all talking together, like, you can't boil the ocean. It's not going to be perfect. It's a journey. And in that context, all right. But the reality is, the moment that you are put in a position of fiduciary care for another human being's data, you have it. It's nuclear. Mm-hmm. You have an obligation today, tomorrow, the next day, and on and on and on and on and on. And there's other problems that are similar that policy people take care of. And so where retired Lieutenant Colonel Lee when he was in the Army actively, he was working on problems for anti-nuclear proliferation. I can barely even say all of the consonants involved in that, much less think about what his day must have been like every PETA person is sending him stuff, and global warming this and nuke that and peace this and power that. And he's sitting in this position of incredible power as a senior leader in the US Army, trying to keep the world from blowing up. No small task. So looking to logic and problem solving and how management and soft systems thinking has been effective in the past is incredibly helpful. And so we arrive to the wicked problem. And a wicked problem has certain definitions. And one of the definitions is a wicked problem is never solved. We will never solve climate change. We will always be actively trying to groom our environment so that it doesn't explode and we turn into Mars. Privacy can be considered a wicked problem. One of the other aspects of privacy and wicked problem solving is that once you solve one problem in a wicked problem, you inevitably cause a different problem. So for example, I decide that I'm going to take my exercise monitor and I'm going to actively start a practice with a doctor's office. So HIPAA is coming on board, and think about health. Health is one of the ubiquitously protected data elements wherever you are on the planet. So now I've taken data that wasn't covered by certain jurisdictional coverage in the US, and I'm now putting it into a bucket with this other thing. That's the hypothetical. What happens in a wicked problem is we have to know who has access to that. So I'm collecting a lot of information attendant about the service provider, physician. It also causes the obligation to have BAA contracts or other sorts of processing agreements. It also kicks off a security routine that has to happen and all this other stuff. So a wicked problem, and the way that we're working on a workshop, it's a 2-day workshop, is learn the principles of how this operationalizes, and then how do we use soft system management to actually think about building a blueprint for your privacy program and the technology buying that you're going to go do. And with that, figuring out, really grounding yourself on what are the resources I need for this, what's the time scale for this, and then what are the tools available today, knowing that, as soon as Comply With Me comes out, like, all your prayers are answered and you might want to buy something totally different. It's going to continue being a wicked problem. And so that's where we're bringing a wicked privacy to the market. I'm excited about that one too.
Yeah, that's a really exciting way to think about it, right? And I'm convinced the more we talk about it and think about it, that's the way to address it. You're right. It's one of those problems that doesn't have an end to it. The more we build technology tools that process personal data, the more valuable data becomes. And I can't see it going the other way around, right? It's
all dual book accounting, right? Like in the 1920s, before the big stock market crash, anyone who had a certain amount of money at the end of the quarter was the rich one. And somehow the ephemeral thinking about investing in intellectual property and scientific endeavor and investing in a larger plant that may make your balance sheet go sideways for a quarter, we've somehow reconciled that into the CFO. We don't expect our CFO to be everywhere all the time, but if we can do that for currency, I cannot see why we can't do that for data.
Yeah, agreed. Let's get a little bit creative. This is the rise of privacy tech after all. What privacy tech feature or product do you wish exists? Imagine you have the world's greatest engineers, some of whom very well might be listening right now and taking notes. If you could have them create and code this product, what would that look like? I mean, and I'm happy to start off. For me, it would be so neat if we could get ahead the privacy issues in neurotechnology, right? And design it in a way that honors our privacy preferences instead of invading our thoughts and ideas. So Elon Musk, if you're listening, please hire privacy engineers for Neuralink.
I did see him tweeting about this webcast, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mel, let's get playful. I mean, it could be the most ridiculous thing in the world. B2C, B2B. I mean, Really, if you could just snap your fingers.
It's interesting that that you would like a privacy protecting solution for neuro, because I wish I had a technology that could help me like read the minds of my privacy team. Simply because, I mean, and it is selfishly because, you know, I spend all of my time helping people express and translate their own thoughts. And if there was a way to automate that would be great. Of course, with all the appropriate consents, opt-outs, and all of that. But, you know, I really do feel like the communication challenges and privacy are such a huge barrier to our success, in terms of not just funding the right projects, but getting them adopted within the right organizations, and for them to actually be used. I don't want to say properly, but used effectively. And, you know, so tools that could help us be more expressive in terms of not just the policy requirements, but the technical limitations, as well as the data subject preferences. I wish I just knew more about what everybody really wanted and what they were trying to say, so that we could get to consensus faster.
Thanks, Mel. And I'm sure Mickey could help out with the tech part of that with her new startup.
Yeah, there's some good stuff out there.
I'm just teeing things up for you. I mean, this is my job now.
You know, my co-founder is like, we are in stealth, behave yourself. I
have stealth? Is that a thing?
I don't do stealth well. I'm like the least privacy officer ever.
You're the only person who came from an InfoSec background who can keep a secret.
It's true. And boy, are there some secrets. That's a different dishy podcast. When we've all made our billions in privacy tech, we'll sit around and talk about what really went down in Silicon Valley, 90s to present. And it's juicy.
100. And it'll be like the dish episode from what happened.
I mean, I gotta be honest, after back-to-back stints at Facebook and Uber, I don't know if I have any secrets left. You might know more than I do at this point.
They're all loose.
There's that. So I am sort of genetically broken in this way. You know, I was raised on a raised floor with my dad from mainframe time and punch cards. So when I look back at the sort of, and I'm a history buff, so I look back at the things like Grace Hopper, and I look at things like Alan Woods, who's fantastic. He keeps trying to retire in the UK. Alan, if you're watching, don't retire. We love you. The classic stuff of thinking about how much you had to be intentional in the early days of compute. When you had to do a punch card and use COBOL, you had like one shot at it. You weren't just slinging stuff all over, make it stick, run fast and break things. Like, it sounds super cute. But when you're really trying to be intentional about something that is as important as, how do I get the best out of my employees? How do I attract and retain the best customers? How do I know which of the 50% of my marketing is absolute crap? Like, how have they been getting along with a D- average for all these years? They'll tell you 50% of their marketing budget is wasted with pride. Why is that the case? That's not the case in your lawyer's office. We lose 50% of our cases and we're winning. So I think as we figure out, like, what is winning in a privacy-centric world, which for me is a high data quality, intellectual, participatory capital, and that's not necessarily the privacy dividend as we're thinking about it today, but if I'm contributing, I should be an active participant in profit. Maybe not directly from shares or whatever, but how does that work? Is there a quid pro quo? So that's like future marketplace is like, how do we clean up our act? There's some great companies. Confidently is one, and one right now that I'm not advising yet, but I might, at least formally, informally. What I don't want to do is retrospectively fix stuff so much as have high value content created, have developers understand the magnitude of what they're building. They're not just building a health app, they're building something that can be used to spy on intelligence agents that are keeping our country safe. They're not just marketing a newsletter to get you to a show, but it might be a woman who's traveling on her own who has been actively harassed time and time again, who might be in mortal danger. So thinking about how do we make it fun? How do we make the data higher quality? And how do we really look at data as that asset level currency that allows us to be strategic on the top end with wicked privacy and nutritious and really thinking thoughtfully as we do for food and the supply chain of food when we're thinking about actually coding for data. And I think once we sort of put the bread on that sandwich, everything else in between becomes very interesting.
I want to be there when you make that sandwich the next time, so
well,
count me.
I'm the one working on the other right now. But
I'll help you smash, yeah, put it together. When you think about this, yeah. When you think about this history, right, tech's history of ignoring privacy in design and engineering, all the work that we have put into combating that, the market's rewarding of privacy's biggest offenders, the resulting technical privacy debt in technology, and you know where we are today as a result. How do you feel about the future of technology as it relates to privacy? And are you hopeful? Are you kind of just like, this is the end, privacy's dead, or somewhere in between? How do you keep doing this every day?
Mel, you start.
Yeah, I'm looking at her right now, and I'm like, I want to hear what you have.
I mean, I have a carefully balanced regimen of coffee and alcohol. That's how I keep doing this every day. But you know, I'm very excited about it, and I'm very optimistic because I'm seeing privacy itself change. If the privacy industry and privacy professionals and the concept and the practice of privacy were not evolving, I would probably feel pretty pessimistic, like we're constantly just beating our head against the wall. But because privacy itself is evolving in terms of how we practice it and who's doing it and how we do it, the discipline and the profession itself is maturing. And that is what keeps me excited and optimistic about the future, because number one, it means that there's still lots and lots of possibilities in terms of how this can play out. It also means that we're going to be able to, bring in a lot more people, a lot more perspectives, a lot more skill sets and types of talent into this as well. And so the thing that is most exciting for me is that I don't know how it ends. There are enough possibilities and there's enough potential that, I can envision a number of possible scenarios. But the fact that I truly don't know, with everything that's happening and changing, it's hard for me to predict how it's going to land. That's what's exciting for me. It's full of potential and promise because, we don't yet have a defined destiny, right? Like this is not a profession of fate. We are, creating it as we go.
I'm with you on that. I'm super excited, but if I may, I predict that it's going to explode the way that cybersecurity did in a good way, right? For the first time in history, we have founders, technologists, investors, on top of the regulators and the consumer advocates and the privacy professionals who have been thinking about these problems for decades in agreement that we need to address this huge privacy debt that we have. And consumers are in on it too, with research saying that they're developing their sentiment, their privacy sentiment in favor for privacy and demanding privacy designed and engineered tools. So to me, that's super exciting. And like you said, there are so many new things and developments in this space that makes it all the more exciting. And that's why we have the rise of privacy tech, and why we're talking right now.
It has been really exciting, actually, to see some specific individuals that I worked with, in previous positions who were perhaps not the most supportive of privacy in their role at the time, who have since gone off and honestly have started privacy tech startups because they recognize the value of it. And so I love the fact that privacy can get better even if people aren't doing it for the right reasons.
Give me some greed. It's bad, but give me some old-fashioned greed. We're starting to see people making multiples on investments for things that are good. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the better we get at high nutrition, high quality data, more control for people that's actually easy to use. It's not about writing a better privacy policy. I did a cartoon for Intel. It was great. The regulators thought it was great. It didn't move the needle. We need every UI person, everyone who's in their Zoom high school right now who can't stop doodling. I can't wait to have you in this marketplace and making things beautiful and accessible and meaningful so that other people can sit on top of that. And then the other thing is, I am boring in the way that I'm constantly looking for the old-fashioned metrics, the Peter Drucker, you manage what you measure. I think you protect what you treasure. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the companies that have had the loudest breaches over the decades, you always see the dip initially in their share value, and then it goes right back up and sometimes higher. And the causal connection is very much broken in my mind, because hopefully you do get cleanup on aisle 3 on some of these breaches. And so when you see the stock price going up, it's not necessarily because investors all don't care. It could be that they've actually made a Tylenol-like recovery of getting out of a bad place in a smart way. But I think the more endemic issue that I'm hoping / working to change is, if you look at the composition of boards today, sometimes a lawyer sneaks in there accidentally because they were someone's cousin, but usually it's a sales guy and a finance guy. And guess what those guys aren't really focused on is systemic, how does the company work? They want to take the widget, run with the football, and spike it in the end zone for cash. And that's really important for how you lead an entity that's focused, particularly commercially. But what it doesn't respect is, could we be that much better? Could we be much more sustainable if we had very strong practices that included things like human rights, like respect of individualism, like having fresh data and not looking at historic bias data, to look at our professional planning, to look at how we're inducing customers to come to us, to look at the types of features and products that we have. So I think diversity on boards will help, just because you inherently get a better perspective than just old white men. I love an old white man. My dad's one. I love you, Dad. But also just getting privacy professionals. Amazon doesn't have a privacy person on their board.
Oh, that doesn't show up at all in their portfolio.
We should be marching in the streets. Target. I mean, I know they have some great privacy professionals. I know of an extraordinarily wonderful privacy professional at Walmart now. Why don't they have it on their board? They're providing food, they're providing prescriptions, they're providing every necessity in the middle of this pandemic as much as any hospital. Why, as citizens, aren't we taking action and saying something as simple as board composition will start to make a difference on what we demand from the rise of privacy technology and the metrics that we want and the care that we give for something as essential as the story that we tell about each other to each other, which is really that's the heart and soul of privacy.
Ladies, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I didn't even get to all the things I wanted to discuss. So we'll have to do round 2 at some point, in a few months or next year. But to close us off, I'd love for you to share the advice that you have to those who are interested in the privacy tech space. So not just the privacy space, which is growing, as we know, but the privacy tech space in particular, which is still at its nascency, and which we see is really full of opportunities. And you can give them to founders, to the investors, and we get those phone calls and emails all the time about, can you talk to us about this space and whether this startup is a good opportunity for us to invest in, or whether this product that we're building is actually does solve a privacy problem that privacy pros have. My first advice is always, is to ask them back, like, what is your conception of privacy? And do you understand privacy? And what are the problems? Like, what is the market research that you've done to understand the pain points that your potential customers have? But if there are others, I'm sure some of them who are listening and would appreciate your pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, I can build on what you said, Lourdes, and then I'll let Mickey kind of close it out so that everybody can walk away with her genius at the end. Yeah, she can do the mic drop. The thing that I would say to all to anybody who's interested in privacy tech, and it applies to everybody, but it's a little bit of a different flavor depending on which role you want to play in the market. But privacy is about people. It's not about compliance. And compliance may be a thing you have to do if privacy is in your title, but that is not the point of the role. It is a task within the role. And so I would really encourage people to think about, the actual people who will be using the technology, both in terms of the internal teams, but also the end user who actually owns the data. Their experience matters a lot. And so, just keep in mind that, like, you are building something for a human being to protect other human beings. We know that privacy in general is a fundamental right in order to protect all other different types of rights and liberties that we have. And so if you're building tech for that space, or you're investing in tech in that space, keep in mind that this is not like you're building like an accounting SaaS project. This has very real world consequences. And if you can help, if you're building a tool specifically for a privacy professional, or somebody else in a company that's doing professional work that touches on privacy, like other engineering teams, keep in mind that the profession is in a moment of elevation right now. We are trying to get more influence and more seats at the table. And once we get a seat at the table, we'd like an opportunity to speak. And so that is what we need of privacy tech. It's something that can elevate the experience of those of us inside companies who are doing this work, as well as enhancing the experience of the users whose data we, are stewards of. Because it's not our data, it belongs to the data subject.
That's such a great point, Mel, and I'm going to take this opportunity to echo that and the big criticism out there of many privacy laws, right? Compliance with those privacy laws doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving the needle when it comes to individual privacy. So I'm just going to leave that there. CPRA, right? Exactly. And the CPRA in November. Well, we'll see. And so, Mickey, advice for those who are trying to, become investors, become founders, advisors to these privacy tech startups that are growing today or popping up today.
Start by rewinding what Lourdes and Mel have just said, because it's so important when you think about what you're building. Where is it going to sit? What's its context? How is it going to, what is your definition of privacy? Where do you want this to sit in the experience today? And then what's its longevity? If you're going to go the venture route, you have to know that you're going to fall into a cookie cutter world of how are you growing, what's your multiple, blah, 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 blah. That may not be where you want to be an innovator. You can be an entrepreneur like I was for 20 years. We built so many great innovations at all of these companies I was at without getting venture capital. We just built, how do you map and do an infographic? We did that at Cisco. How do you do a graphic novel to encapsulate a 16-page single-spaced boring privacy policy? We did that at Intel. All sorts of innovations that are wherever you are today, you can start innovating in privacy, and that's really exciting to me. The other part is like, Mel's already said this much more clearly because she is a communication goddess, but compliance is not the goal. And sometimes just because you can doesn't mean you should. So the title Comply With Me is a little bit cheeky because I've already had some pushback saying, hey, you hate compliance. And it's a play off of that Pan Am sort of 50s feeling, comply with me. Comply with me is like, that's just the beginning of a journey. I want you to feel like you are in like a Jimmy Stewart movie when you're developing your code, and when you're doing wicked privacy, you're in the situation room. There's a feeling that comes with innovation and a satisfaction in inventing things. Have that in a bucket and have that as your vision, but do recognize and get very serious about what are the 10 and 10 only slides that you're going to use for a pitch deck. My first pitch I did, I had like 48 slides. It was horrific. And Jim Adler, who's runs M&A for Toyota now, I went to him because I knew it sucked. And he honestly and directly said, that's not a pitch, that's a keynote. So understand what pitching for money means, understand your goals and your metrics for venture capitalists, and understand that those may not be your sales motion as you're walking in and actually making your technology something that is viable for the marketplace. What they need to see in growth, you have to be very strategic in your head of how are you going to get there without being a scumbag. Please don't be a scumbag. We have enough of those.
And bam, that was the mic drop that we were talking about.
Okay, good. Don't be an asshole. We don't like that.
Yep.
Asshole Free Fridays, right? AFFs. It's been a pleasure, ladies. Thank you so much. If you have any parting words, please feel free to share them with our viewers. If not, thank you. Again, I'd love to have you to, either guest host or come for part 2 again sometime next year or in a few months. If you have any parting words, please. I'm sure our viewers would love them. And if not, thank you, everyone.
He stuck through this whole thing. Jason's done some good work out there, and figure out how we're going to build, guys. Let's build something better.